For our last speaker on this tract, we have Ms. Marisa Bruno with the Hill managing part or water program manager. I'll eventually read it in the right order with the Hill Country Alliance, and she's going to kind of put a nice, kind of a different spin on kind of a little bit of the doom and gloom and agency consequences and everything else, and actually talk about a little bit more of the opportunities that have kind of presented themselves in moving forward with a lot of these subdivisions. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Bruno.
Thank you. I don't know if you did that on purpose, Adam, but Emily set me up perfectly for this presentation. Emily was talking about how counties don't have a lot of tools to manage all of the new land coming into or under their jurisdiction. But this presentation is about how counties might have more tools than they think based on what we're seeing in the Hill Country. And actually, is this the clicker?
Yes, ma'am.
Big green button in the middle. Okay, and I recognize a lot of folks in this room today, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm the water program manager at the Hill Country Alliance. And if you don't live in Central Texas, you might not know who we are and what we do. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So HCA is a regional nonprofit. We work with a lot of different partners, many GCDs, many of them in the room today, to protect the land, night skies, water, and unique character of the Hill Country. And we do that through creating a lot of resources, some of which I'm going to talk about today. We have a leadership institute where we convene various elected officials on topics related to growth and conservation. We organize a bunch of events, some of which I'll reference as well today. And we love to spotlight folks doing great work. And that's really what today's presentation is about. So this might be superfluous, but for those who don't know, maybe they're not from Texas, the Hill Country is Central Texas. We consider it 17 counties. It's very unique for having these vast karst aquifer systems that are very much interconnected with our rivers. 12 of the state's major rivers get their start in the Hill Country, and so it's a really, really unique groundwater dependent system. We are also famous for being the bullseye of last year's terrible, terrible drought. Things are a little bit better, but they were really awful last year. You know, they say never waste a good drought. I have to say I'm a bit disappointed almost by the transition in the colors, but it is a really good thing that we're getting out of the drought. This might be a bit obvious, but I'll talk specifically about why we're so focused on groundwater at the Hill Country Alliance. And this goes beyond our water program. Our land program is very much focused on groundwater as well. And that's because so many of our communities rely on groundwater exclusively. Cities like Fredericksburg and Bernie are really, really dependent on groundwater. And also because the rivers that, again, are dependent on groundwater for their base flow, especially during times of drought, are the economic heart of the region. So to help communities engage with the groundwater process and to understand exactly what tools are available, we published last year this resource called Tools for Managing Groundwater in the Texas Hill Country. And a large part of the report does focus on understanding what GCDs are and what tools they have available to them. So we talk about enabling legislation and the water code and all that stuff. And I don't think y'all will be able to see this, but I will make sure to highlight that we also talk about the important role that counties, cities, and residents have to play in managing groundwater as well. We in the Hill Country are especially concerned with the roles that counties have to play because a lot of the growth we're seeing in the region is happening in the unincorporated areas where, as the story goes, counties have traditionally had less tools. So this graphic is from a report we produced in 2022 that showed that in the last 30 years, the Hill Country has doubled its population in the unincorporated areas, and then we see some scary counties like Hays County, sorry Charlie, that are tripling. And so there's a lot of pressure, and for the GCDs in this room, you'll also know this is where you have this proliferation of exempt wells. So we're very, very much focused on the opportunities at the county to do more to support groundwater districts. And as Emily referenced, this has never been more important because now with the passage of Senate Bill 2038, we're seeing more and more land come under county jurisdiction. And there's an amazing report produced by the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance that does a count of how many petitions have been made since September 2023. And the number that I saw that was last updated in April was in just the high growth counties, over 500 petitions have been made to leave cities. So now we have all of this land coming under county jurisdiction that formerly would have had to comply with city ETJ regulation, no longer. So, in addition to our groundwater report, we also produced a report on tools available to counties. And this was basically a refresher of a report done many, many years ago, but the goal of this report was to say, what are counties doing to manage growth in their counties? And we'll come back to that QR code in case folks want to look at it later. But this is probably the most interesting thing in the whole report. Some lawyers wrote it, so it's like 100 pages long, but if you want to just get to the nitty-gritty, there's this table that basically shows how counties are regulating or not regulating different aspects of development, from impact fees to impervious cover limits. And our takeaway when looking at a graph like this is that counties are regulating things very differently, which means that there's an opportunity to be doing more. And so, as a follow-up to this report, we started convening counties together in what we're calling the county-to-county workshops. There have only been 2 so far, but so far I think they're going okay. And we're working with Kendall County, Comal County, and Hayes County to co-host these workshops. And the goal of these workshops is to bring counties together to talk about these tools and these gaps and see if there might be opportunities to be doing more. And I will say that far and away, the #1 topic on all of these counties' minds is water, and because we're in the hill country, it's groundwater. And I know that GCDs are the state's preferred method or format for regulating groundwater, but of course, counties are responsible for the health and safety of their citizens, and water is at the foundation of that. So counties are really worried about this. And so, oops, I don't know if I know how to go back. Close your eyes. I'm here to talk about some of the learnings from these workshops. I want to say I am not a lawyer, so please don't quiz me on the statute. Vanessa can probably quote all of Chapter 36, but I cannot do that. If you have legal questions, I'm happy to provide the legal references after. I also am not the originator of any of these ideas or any of the tools that are being put into practice, but I think pretty much everything that I reference has a GCD member in this room now that can talk to how it actually was implemented, so I'm happy to point them out later. I'm really just here as an aggregator of all of these wonderful ideas and to spotlight these ideas because that's what we do. Okay, so the first tool I want to talk about is setting impervious cover limits. Y'all already probably know this, but obviously the more impervious cover you get, the less infiltration you get, so you're impacting how much our groundwater is recharging. You also are going to have more runoff, and you're going to have more flooding. So impervious cover is not great for groundwater. And in case it's not said or haven't said it, more flooding, more stormwater also impacts groundwater quality, especially in the hill country where we have so many recharge features. So impervious cover is an issue, and we often hear counties say that they don't have the authority to set impervious cover limits, but we have seen that Travis County has. So Travis County in the western part of the county has set impervious cover limits on commercial and residential subdivisions, and they're pretty awesome. So for example, residential subdivisions have an impervious cover limit of 30%, and commercial subdivisions have an impervious cover limit of 45%. Significantly, they're doing this only in the part of the county where they have significant concerns about groundwater quality and groundwater quantity, so those impervious cover limits are justified by water quality and quantity concerns. Why does this matter? Okay, this is the only slide I promise that has this much text. I'm sorry, I didn't know how else to do it. But basically, Chapter 32 of the Local Government Code, this is like the standard language around counties, right? Counties have the authority to promote the health, safety, moral, and general welfare of the county and healthful development of unincorporated areas of the county. There's this huge but, right, that they cannot regulate the use of any building, bulk, height, number of buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Those shall nots have been interpreted to say counties can't do zoning. And that has very much agreed upon by all the legal experts. Counties can't do zoning. And so the question often has been, is impervious cover zoning? And what our partners that we work with that have said impervious cover should be a county tool and is a county tool have said that because the law does authorize and encourage counties to protect their citizens from stormwater and flooding, impervious cover is a tool that the state has authorized counties to use. The other thing at the very long paragraph, and again, I apologize for that, is a court case from 1998. Now, this was a court case that involved a developer and the city of Austin, and in this case, the city of Austin had impervious cover limits in the city of Austin's ETJ. And the developer said that that was zoning, and therefore the city of Austin could not do it. And the Texas Supreme Court, and at that point it was Abbott, Governor Abbott, who wrote the opinion back then, said that in this case, because the intention of the impervious cover limit was water quality protection and not zoning, impervious cover limit did not fall under zoning. Now, this is an ETJ and city case, but the same language that says what cities can do in their ETJ is exactly mirrored in the language that says what counties can do in unincorporated areas. So this is a really interesting and important court case. Not a lawyer, but you can find it, and it's a really good decision. Okay, tool number 2 of what counties can do. So already GCDs set minimum lot sizes for exempt wells. That's really common. I think maybe less commonly is the fact that counties will sometimes mirror GCDs and in their regulations set the minimum lot size for private well and septic to match the GCDs. So now there's this sort of dual protection. Lots of GCDs in the Hill Country are already doing this. The first that comes to mind is in Bandera. But something that I think is also really interesting, and I'm glad to see Kirk Campbell is in the room. He's at the Cow Creek GCD, so if you have more questions about this, please find him. But Cow Creek GCD has implemented a 10-acre maximum density. So the way that this works is that if you have a 100-acre ranch and you want to subdivide it, you can have up to 10 wells, but they don't have to be 1 well per 10 acres. You can cluster your wells and have 10 acres total, but not necessarily spread out, which is really good for open space, really good for recharge. We're not here to talk about GCDs. What I want to talk about is that Kendall County went and matched this in their regulations. So if you look at Kendall County subdivision regulations, the maximum density for a well and septic system together is 10 acres. So they are matching the GCD in this language, and I think that's a really great example of GCDs and counties working together. I will acknowledge that in the Hill Country, we are lucky that many, though not all, of our counties are within a priority groundwater management area. Mitchell, I saw you shake your head. And so there are specific provisions for these counties, and that gives them some different tools. I have not seen what Kendall County has done outside of the PGMA, and because I'm not a lawyer, I can't offer that you could get away with it. All right, so the third tool that I've seen in place is that, we have this amazing new law that says you must have a water availability report if your subdivision is based on groundwater. But it's different to prove that your well can produce water for 30 years than it is to say the whole sort of area of wells has enough water for 30 years. And in order to do that, you'd have to be looking at how that one subdivision's water availability report interacts with other water availability reports from other subdivisions. I know a lot of GCDs are already doing this in practice, where a county maybe has an interlocal agreement with the GCD, and the GCD is looking at well interference or cumulative impacts. But what I thought that was really cool is that Blanco County put this in their subdivision regulations. And Ron Fiesler, where are you at? Okay, Ron was a big part of that. That was just passed last year. So I'm going to highlight a couple lines here. So with Blanco's new subdivision regulations, any new water availability report that a developer creates or the engineer they hire creates must take into account the water availability reports of any other subdivisions located within approximately half a mile. I kind of like this version because it puts the onus on the developers to do this up front. What we're seeing more commonly, which is still awesome, and this is from Burnett County, Central Texas GCD, and Mitchell Sodek, sorry, I'm calling everyone out, he can talk about this more, is working with engineers to do this. This puts the burden on the GCDs to do the work, but it's still getting done. And the Central Texas GCD has these amazing policy memos where engineers are reviewing the water availability reports produced by the developers, and they are looking at the cumulative impact assessments. I really like that they are calling out the sort of sections of the code that gives them, the authority to do this. So it's a great example. Go look at Central Texas GCD's policy memos. All right, the last tool I want to talk about, and this is less common because admittedly something like this requires more resources, is that counties can put in place incentives for conservation developments. So we've got two images here of two different developments. One clearly has a lot more trees, a lot more open space, and the one below has things more spread out. They both have the exact same number of houses, right? So what we're showing is two sort of ways of development with the same number of residences created. And because we know that open space is better for recharge in the Hill Country, we'd love to see more of these sort of clustered subdivisions happen. They're not really happening. And so the sort of conversation has been that we need to be incentivizing this sort of development. The way that Hays County did this, or does this, or is trying to do this, is through developer agreements. So a couple years ago, they commissioned a consultant, actually the same consultant we used to produce our county tools report. And that consultant recommended a sort of matrix to help incentivize conservation developments. And so the county can sort of refer to this matrix of incentives when they're evaluating a development and looking at incentives. This is not currently in their subdivision regulations, but it's in discussion to become so. Ooh, I don't think you'll be able to see this. I can barely see this, but I'm gonna squint. So some of the things that they're incentivizing or giving developments points for. 1, rainwater harvesting is the primary source for potable water or irrigation. 2, purple pipes and water reuse are in place in the development. Further down the list, the development has AC condensate recovery. I mean, these are really, really great things that the county is essentially awarding points to developers to put in place. Ooh, sorry about that. Based on the number of points, they have a sort of list of incentives that a developer can access. And so if a developer has condensate in place and low impact development and rain gardens and all these things, they might get density bonuses, they might get PID funding, et cetera. And so this is, I think, a cool model to incentivize the kind of development we want to see if we want to see more sustainable groundwater use and protection in the Hill Country. I will note, to date, as far as I know, or last I checked, no development has taken them up on this. We've seen this issue also in Travis County, so I think there's lots of rooms to innovate and have conversations with developers about what more we could be doing so that folks actually are taking counties up on these incentives. Okay, so those were the 4 tools within the subdivision world, and let me just see how I'm doing on time. Okay, sweet. So what else could counties do to support groundwater districts outside of just the realm of subdivision regulations? One of the things we're talking to not just counties, but also cities about is One Water buildings. And we use the word One Water a lot in the Hill Country, but I guess show of hands if you know what One Water is. Okay, so when we talk about One Water, we're essentially talking about thinking about wastewater, stormwater, and traditionally potable water sources like groundwater as one resource and managing it holistically as you think about supply. And so what a One Water building is, and it's almost easiest to think about it with this specific example, is a building that is capturing its AC condensate, it's capturing its rainwater instead of letting it roll off as stormwater. It's recycling its wastewater. So it's using all of these waters in its building design. So this school has dual plumbing. It uses exclusively rainwater and AC condensate capture to flush toilets. It uses recycled wastewater for irrigation. And in the drought of 2022, which was not a good year for rain in Hays County, it used 50% less groundwater than the neighboring school. So there are significant water savings to be produced by buildings at the building level. And in a worst drought ever year, it's projected to use 90% less groundwater than the neighboring elementary school. So we would love to see counties championing these sorts of buildings. Shout out to Kerr County. I know they're looking at some of these technologies in their new animal control center. Another example I'll just spotlight, because another Kerrville example is I just learned that the Kerrville Hospital captures 400,000 gallons a year of AC condensate, and that's how they irrigate all of their green spaces. So lots of opportunities here, and we'd love to see counties being a leader. Also, rainwater harvesting. Big question mark here for me, because we just did a report. I don't see any counties, at least in the Hill Country, that are providing incentives for rainwater harvesting. But outside of the Hill Country, there are examples where counties provide funding. And so I think that this is potentially an opportunity as part of their stormwater management permit. And another sort of question mark, but less of a question mark, is that we've heard GCDs or counties suggest that there could be a role for counties to play in basically saying, when a new development comes into play, the stormwater that's rolling off a property must look the same as it did before a property was developed. So things that are going to require a developer to retain their stormwater on site might encourage things like rain gardens and other low impact development features. Okay, so I'm pretty much at the end of my presentation. I'll leave you with a few takeaways. One is, like I said in the beginning, managing groundwater under these very tough Texas conditions is going to require a big team effort. It can't just be groundwater districts. And so if you're not already talking to your county, I would encourage y'all to do so. I think counties also have a big responsibility to support GCDs. I recognize counties have limited resources, like Emily said, especially some of our more rural counties are very short-staffed. But this sort of collaboration up front, getting ahead of growth and improving your subdivision regulations, I think is going to have big payoffs in the future. So with that, I will leave you with some QR codes. Leah, will you raise your hand? Okay. I brought a few copies of our groundwater tools book. I only have 15 of them, but if you're interested in checking them out, I hope you'll grab a copy. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Okay, fine, I'll start, because you don't get the benefit of going to the reception first. Even though it's really nice to have speakers that basically time monitor themselves, and it works great, so I don't have to look at my cards. I did have a couple of questions for you, thanks to you. But you highlighted, all of the tools that are available to counties, but didn't really kind of get into why more, especially outside of the Hill Country, may not be implementing them.
So I can't really speak to what's going on outside of the Hill Country. I'm pretty myopically focused on our 17 counties. But I think that this is really kind of tricky territory because there's not a lot. Well, let me just say this. The tools I talked about today, there's no law that says, and counties can and shall do conservation developer agreements, right? And so a lot of this is counties interpreting the law, and some counties are more willing and confident to lean into this sort of interpretive world than others are, and so it's tricky. And some will also have constituents that maybe feel more strongly about not going outside the bounds of what the law explicitly states. That said, I think the current time and the situations we're dealing with require a sort of thinking outside the box approach.
I still can't release you guys. You might as well ask a question. Mr. Fuessler, I know you're always good for one.
Well, it's not that I have a question, but I could help you out with that, Marisa. The creation of the Hill Country Priority Groundwater Management back in about 1990 or something like that by the Texas Water Commission, it created a situation for the territory involved in that priority groundwater management area for the county commissioners court to create additional protective measures like the water availability study requirement and that sort of thing. And that was a big factor for the Hill Country because it was determined that there is a projected shortage coming up in the near future, which is why they created the priority groundwater management area. I don't know what to say, except I think there's one or two smaller priority groundwater management areas in Texas, but I think we have a benefit in the Hill Country by having that designation. And once again, it seems like I heard this morning with the legislative report that they passed a rule that requires water availability studies of some sort for all subdivisions. And that was kind of news to me because I don't follow the legislature too much, but we'll see how that works out.
One and final time asking for any questions. Hearing and seeing none, please join me in our appreciation for Ms. Bruno and her presentation.
Appreciate it.